I lay on the parlor floor with my cheek against the cold linoleum, unable to lift my hand to the doorknob. Outside, a slow hiss moved along the siding, as if someone breathed through a reed. The air tasted of sugared ether and damp leaves. Mrs. Hall's canary fell quiet in its cage. In the window glass, our lantern flame bent sideways, blue at the tip. Men later asked me to set it down plainly, and I did, though my hands still remembered that stiffness. If you would hear it through, I asked you to like this account, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. It began 3 weeks earlier, on the afternoon of September 8th, 1933, when the Illinois State Police wired me from Springfield to ride the interurban down to Mattoon and observe a string of night afflictions that the local papers had begun to hint at, but not name. I brought my field case, a pocket compass, a Kodak with flash powder, and 2 surplus service respirators left from the Great War. Sergeant Ed Kearney met me at the depot in a Model A with a cracked windshield. Frank Dwyer, a young photographer from the Journal Gazette, sat beside him rolling a cigarette with hands stained by developer. We drove past Douglas Park, where children chased a ball in the late heat, and Kearney spoke of his boy in Decatur, as if home talk could keep the matter small. At the police station on Broadway, Chief Wright introduced Dr. Helen Vance from the University of Illinois, sent down with a small valise of test tubes and litmus papers. She listened without expression as 2 housewives described waking with numb limbs and a sweet chloroform odor. I inspected a window screen brought in as evidence, and the wire mesh bore a dark smear as if rubbed by an oily glove. That evening, September 8th, we divided. Kearney took the north streets near Grant Avenue. I took the west end by the railroad yards, and Dr. Vance remained at the station to prepare reagents. Dwyer followed me with his camera and tripod. We walked under the arc lamps and listened. A dog barked once, then stopped as if ordered. The town settled into the low hum of freight cars. Near midnight, an unplaceable scraping sounded behind a hedge, like metal against dry wood. We found nothing when we searched, only chicory weeds and a broken bottle. I told myself it had been some vagrant boy meddling for mischief, and Dwyer agreed too quickly. At one sharp, wind came from the embarrass bottoms and carried a faint sweetness as from spilled varnish. It passed in a minute. I noted it in my pocketbook and circled 3 houses whose screens sat newly mended with twine, the wire torn at the corners as if pulled outward. On September 9th, we visited the Ellises on North 21st Street. Their front rooms smelled of coal oil and damp plaster. Mrs. Ellis spoke steadily, yet her fingers worried a handkerchief until it frayed. She said she had awoken to a cold patch along her pillow, then a weight in her chest, and her legs had refused her. Mr. Ellis had heard 2 soft thumps against the siding, measured as if someone tested the boards. Under the window, we found a pale stain on the paint and a few grains of grit on the sill. Dr. Vance sealed them. In daylight, the town laughed at itself, then turned cautious by supper. Men sat on porches with shotguns across their knees. And one fellow on Richmond Avenue had wired a cowbell to his gate. Chief Wright did not care for panic. He ordered us to speak of chemicals and prowlers, never of phantoms. Dr. Vance ran her tests at the station table beneath a swinging bulb. The grit fizzed weakly in acid, then went inert. She shrugged and said, "Nothing that explains paralysis." Kearney tapped his badge and insisted the whole affair would end with an arrest. By September 10th, the reports had multiplied. The pattern troubled me more than any single tale. The attacks came in short, neat spans, always after the last streetcar and always in rooms with windows cracked for heat. Cats vanished from alleys. On my night rounds, I heard crickets cease in a strip of yards as if a curtain had been drawn. In the grass behind the Phelps house, dew held a set of narrow impressions, a heel and toe that led to the fence and ended there. On September 11th, after midnight, Kearney insisted we use ourselves for bait. We took rooms in Mrs. Hall's boarding house on South 6th, a frame place with thin walls and lace curtains. Dwyer and I sat in the front parlour with our coats on, a hand lantern between us, and the two respirators laid open like prayers. The house held its breath. Then the lantern flame dipped hard, though no draught touched my face, and a hiss travelled along the clapboards outside our window. Dwyer struck a match, and his flash powder tin jumped in his pocket with a sharp pop, as if struck by a hammer. For one instant, a tall shadow crossed the curtain from below, and the canary in the kitchen gave a single choking note. Kearney rushed the front door with his revolver out, and I followed with a lantern shuttered in my palm. The yard smelled suddenly of wet pennies and something sweet, clinging, like overripe pears. The air around the porch steps felt colder than the street, a narrow band of chill that ended at the gate. We found no man, no ladder, no thrown stone. Only the grass along the foundation lay pressed as if a body had crawled there. At the fence, the soil showed a single gouge, then nothing, as if whatever had moved had stepped into air. Mrs. Hall came down in her robe, shaking and angry, and demanded we leave before we brought the devil to her door. Dwyer sat on the stairs with his head in his hands, his cigarette forgotten. Dr. Vance arrived at dawn, pale from her lampwork, and scraped the dark smear from our parlour screen into a vial. The residue looked like grease, yet it dried to a powder on paper. She held it to her tongue, then spat and rinsed, and I saw her skepticism falter. "There is an anaesthetic in it," she said quietly, as if speaking louder might summon it back. The nights that followed grew stranger in their orderliness. We took turns in pairs, one watching, one writing times by wristwatch, as though careful notes could pin down a phantom. We heard a whistle twice that matched the Illinois Central Engineers' call, yet no train passed. Once, a woman's laugh came from the alley behind the red and white store, thin and repeated, like a phonograph needle stuck. When we ran there, we found only a blanket of silence so complete that our own breaths sounded rude. Even the street lamps seemed to dim in that quiet pocket, leaving a greyness between their pools of light. On September 14th, a humid fog rolled in from the fields west of town, and with it came the strongest odour yet, sweet and medicinal. We stationed ourselves near the railroad cut by DeWitt Avenue. Dwyer aimed his camera toward a row of back windows. At 2:15, a shape moved low along a hedge, not crawling, not walking, but sliding. A brief metallic clink followed, and a pale stream drifted toward a kitchen window. Dwyer's shutter jammed. My pocket compass quivered, then swung as if confused. Kearney charged through the wet grass, cursing under his breath, and I went after him, my boots dragging in mud. By the time we reached the hedge, there was only fog and the close stink of chemical sweetness. The ground showed no clear prints, only a scuffed line as if a sack had been pulled. A rooster in the nearby coop beat its wings against the boards, until feathers floated out like scraps of paper. When we returned to the street, we found 3 houses awake with lights on and women coughing behind curtains. Dr. Vance examined one girl's pupils and said they held wide as saucers, though she could not rouse her legs. By then, the town had turned against us in small ways. A grocer on Broadway refused to sell us coffee after dark, and boys followed Dwyer shouting that he was staging photographs. Chief Wright received letters demanding martial law, and he answered with more patrolmen, more noise, more false confidence. Yet the attacks shifted as if our presence redirected them. One night, nothing happened at all, and we almost welcomed the lull until we noticed that every dog in a 5-block square had been shut indoors, not by owners, but by instinct. Only later did I understand that quiet had been a warning. On September 16th, we waited in the Ellis house, windows latched, respirators ready. Near 2 sharp, the sounds arrived first, a measured tap, a pause, then another, as if counting. The street outside went dead. Cold crept under the sill and climbed my shins. The odor followed, sweet as crushed pears. Through a crack in the curtain, I saw a man-like shape, hat brim low, face wrapped, pressing a small pump can to the screen. He turned, as if he heard my heartbeat inside me. Kearney kicked the door and fired into the fog. The shot sounded muffled, as if it passed through blankets. I tore the screen away and felt it crumble under my fingers, brittle with powder. Dwyer vomited in the yard, choking, his eyes streaming. We chased the shape to the alley and lost it where fog pooled thick. No footprints marked the mud. Chief Wright ordered us off the case, saying the town needed calm more than hunters. Dr. Vance packed her vials without speaking, and Kearney's hands shook when he tried to light his pipe. We rode the morning train back to Springfield with the car smelling of wool and coal smoke. Dwyer kept rubbing his forearm as if the numbness still clung there. I delivered our notes and samples to the State House laboratory, and a clerk stamped my report without reading it. The chemist said the powder might be any number of solvents and asked whether I had been drinking. In Mattoon, the paper printed that the danger had passed. In my private ledger, I wrote in ink that it had merely moved. Months later, when the Journal Gazette ran Dwyer's photographs of torn screens and anxious porches, my name appeared only as a stateman. Chief Wright preferred that my official memorandum spoke of pranksters and vapors. It did not mention the compass needle or the way the fog seemed to listen. Vance urged me to destroy it. I carried Mattoon into later years and into ordinary rooms. In 1939, in a Peoria hotel, I woke with my arm asleep and panic rose before reason. The radiator hissed and the air tasted faintly sweet. I lay rigid, waiting for the measured taps. After the war, I met Kearney at a veterans' picnic outside Charleston. His hair had gone white at the temples, yet his gaze kept slipping to the tree line. I asked if he had ever seen the Prowler clear. He shook his head once and would say no more. Doctor, Vance wrote me in 1952 that her university file on the case had vanished from its drawer. In 1967, a neighbor painted my window frames, and the varnish odor drove me into the yard where I watched the fence until dark, counting breaths in the wind. Men still asked what gas it had been, what motive, what name. I never had those answers. I only knew that something moved with intent and left almost nothing behind. Some nights my window screen gleamed, dusted with sugar.